Purim Sameach Rabotai. We are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Eruvin. We are up to Perik Tet Mishnah Dalid. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbai ben Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov Menuchatam beGan Eden. Amen. This Mishnah discusses whether carrying is ever permitted in an area that has only two walls opposite each other and is open on the other two sides. The Mishnah begins, Haboneh aliyah gabe shnei batim. If one builds an upper story on top of two houses that are on opposite sides of a public domain, so that the upper story now forms a roof over the public domain. Whoever is using their art school study can see a diagram in the notes, diagram A. V'chen gisharim hamfulashim, and so too if there are bridges that cross over a public domain so that the road underneath the bridge is open on two opposite sides while being enclosed on the other two sides by the walls holding up the bridge. That would be diagram B in the notes. Mitaltilin tachten b'Shabbat. The Mishnah says we may carry underneath them on Shabbat because these places are now viewed as being surrounded by four walls. The two walls of the house or the bridge supports on either side of the public domain, and two legal walls that are formed by the sides of the overhead structures extending downwards, which the commentaries explain is based on the legal principle of Pi Tikra Yored V'Sotem. The edge of a roof comes down and seals off the area beneath it. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda, V'Chachayim Osrin. But the sages forbid carrying in these places because in their opinion the sides of the overhead structures do not extend downward to form walls. In such a case, the commentators explain that the sages hold that the principle of the side of a roof extending downward to create a wall does not work when it's necessary to enclose two open sides that are opposite each other. Vodamar Rabbi Yehuda said further, Me'arvin lamavoy hamfulash, we can make an eruv for an alley that is open at both ends but has two full walls on the other sides, provided there is a pole or a beam at both open sides, because the commentators explain, according to Rabbi Yehuda, even two walls suffice to make the area between them a private domain. Nevertheless, rabbinic law requires putting up a pole or beam on both open sides. Now, an eruv for such an alley, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is sufficient because two full walls alone form a private domain on the biblical level. V'chachamim osrin, but the sages forbid carrying in this alley because they hold that two full walls do not form a private domain on the biblical level, and therefore the poles or beams on the open sides of the alley are insufficient. According to the chachamim, according to the sages, at least three walls are needed to make a private domain. A pole or beam permits an area for carrying only if it qualifies as a private domain on the biblical level. And the Rav does tell us, Ven halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda. And that is the end of Perik Tet Mishnah Daled. We begin now with chapter 10, Perik Yud Mishnah Aleph. The first two Mishnahot of this chapter deal with the person who finds several pairs of tefillin in an open place, such as a field where they might be defiled by animals, for example. This Mishnah teaches how he may take them to a safe place, to a public domain on Shabbat. Hamotzeh tefillin, if one finds several pairs of tefillin in a field or other unsafe place, machnisan zug zug, he should bring them in pair by pair, meaning he should wear them one pair at a time in the regular way, one on his head and one on his arm, and bring them to a safe place where he takes them off. He then goes back and repeats this procedure until he has secured all the pairs of tefillin. By wearing them, he does not commit the transgression of carrying in a public domain, because wearing tefillin is like wearing a garment. And the commentaries explain there is a dispute between Tanaim whether the mitzvah of tefillin applies only on weekdays or on Shabbat as well. The Tanakam of our Mishnah takes the view that wearing tefillin is obligatory even on Shabbat. So according to this, wearing tefillin in a public domain is completely permitted, like wearing a garment. The rabbis, though, banned wearing tefillin on Shabbat because they were concerned that one of the leather straps might tear, and then being unable to wear the tefillin, one might carry them in a public domain, which is biblically prohibited. So in our Mishnah's case, where someone found tefillin that are at risk of being defiled, the rabbis lifted their prohibition and allowed him to wear the tefillin in the public domain in order to spare them from desecration. Nevertheless, he may wear only one pair of tefillin at a time, even though there is room on the head and arm for two. He may not wear two pairs, because wearing an extra pair of tefillin on a day when the biblical mitzvah applies, which includes Shabbat, according to this Tana, is forbidden by the Torah under the prohibition of adding to a mitzvah bal tosif. And furthermore, since one is forbidden to wear a second pair of tefillin, they are considered a burden. Therefore, wearing them in a public domain is a biblically prohibited melacha. Rabban Gamliel says, Shnaim Shnaim, he may bring them in 2 by 2, meaning he may wear 2 pairs at a time, 2 on his head and 2 on his arm, because even wearing 2 pairs is not considered carrying. Rabban Gamliel holds that one is obligated to wear tefillin only on weekdays and not on Shabbat, and therefore they may not be worn in a public domain on Shabbat, because they are not considered to be articles of clothing on that day. Nevertheless, in the case that the Mishnah discusses, where tefillin must be safe from desecration, the rabbis permitted wearing them in a public domain because they can be considered a tachshit, an adornment, like jewelry, and even 2 pairs of tefillin may be worn together as an adornment since there is room on the head for 2 pairs. And the Rav says the prohibition of adding to a mitzvah does not apply, since in this Tana's opinion, the opinion of Rabban Gamliel, there is no mitzvah of tefillin on Shabbat, and therefore wearing tefillin on that day is meaningless as far as the mitzvah is concerned. And the Rav does tell us, Rabban Gamliel, the halacha does not follow Rabban Gamliel. Now the Mishnah limits this discussion to a particular situation. In what cases this apply? Meaning, when is one allowed to bring tefillin to a safe place, 1 or 2 pairs at a time, through a public domain on Shabbat? Bishanot, in the case of old ones, which have markings that show that they are definitely tefillin. Aval b'chadashot. But in the case of new ones, which do not have such markings and therefore might not even be tefillin, patul. One is exempt, meaning one should not save them by wearing them in a public domain. Now, the commentators explain if the tefillin are old, then even if its straps are untied, the markings left by the knots are discernible. Now, these markings prove that they are indeed tefillin, but if the tefillin are new, there is no way to tell whether they are real tefillin or an amulet, which would be an ornament containing mystical words that's worn to protect from evil. Since they might not be tefillin, wearing them in a public domain on Shabbat is forbidden, and even an amulet that has the same contents as tefillin is not sacred because it was not made in accordance with halakha for the sake of the mitzvah. Now, usually wearing tefillin in a public domain on Shabbat is forbidden, either because the rabbis forbade wearing tefillin anywhere on that day, or because they are not articles of clothing which may be worn in a public domain. Now, although the rabbis permitted wearing tefillin in a public domain to spare them from desecration, that law applies only when they are certainly tefillin and not when their status is in doubt. Now, the Mishnah considers the law in a situation where there are so many pairs of tefillin that even if he will go back and forth wearing 1 or 2 pairs at a time, he will not be able to save all of them before the end of Shabbat. Mitza'an tzvatim o chirichot. If one found them tied in numerous pairs or in large bundles, and there are too many of them to secure them all before nightfall, machshich aleinu mevian, he should stay with them, guarding them until nightfall, and then bring them to a safe place. And the commentators explain if there are so many tefillin that he does not have enough time to save them all by going back and forth wearing 1 or 2 pairs at a time before the end of Shabbat, he will have to return to their location after Shabbat in any event. Now, since he will have to go back anyways, the rabbis did not waive their prohibition against wearing tefillin, but instead they obligated him to watch the tefillin until nightfall and then carry them all to safety. Ubasakana, however, if by wearing or staying with the tefillin he will put himself in danger, mechasan ve'olechlo, he should just cover them and leave. And the commentaries explain, cover them with his cloak and then leave. Now, the commentaries add that the danger spoken of here is that the government of the time banned the practice of Judaism and would punish anyone found with tefillin. In that case, the only option is to cover the tefillin and leave. Now, it makes no difference whether he found only a few pairs of tefillin, in which case he must wear them 1 or 2 pairs at a time, or whether he found many pairs, in which case he must stay and guard them until nightfall. Either way, if the government had banned the practice of Judaism, he would be putting himself in danger because they would persecute anyone found with tefillin, whether he is wearing them or just guarding them. So he has no choice then but to cover up the tefillin as best as he can and leave. But if the danger is that he might be attacked by thieves, he is not allowed to abandon the tefillin because he has another means by which to save them all before nightfall, meaning he carries many pairs less than 4 amot at a time, which means he walks less than 4 amot, stops for a moment, again goes less than 4 amot, stops, and so on until he reaches a safe place. When he stops, it's not necessary to put the tefillin down on the ground. Coming to a stop when holding something is logically the same as putting it down. Now, if he is in danger of being attacked by thieves in the place where the tefillin are located, The halacha, the law depends on how many pairs he found. In the event that he found only a few pairs, he should bring them to safety wearing 1 or 2 pairs at a time, like the Mishnah said earlier, since he will not be attacked when he is away from that location. However, if he found many pairs where the halacha is that one must stay with them, doing so will put him in danger of being attacked. So it is in that case that instead of staying with the tefillin, he should carry them less than 4 mot at a time. And according to the Gemara on page 97b, these rulings are stated in the Mishnah itself. The Gemara says that the Mishnah here is missing words and that it should conclude like this. In what case were these words said? Meaning, in what type of dangerous situation is one allowed to cover the tefillin and leave? When he is in danger of being arrested by a government of idolaters who banned the practice of Judaism. But if he is in danger of being attacked by thieves, he may carry them less than 4 amot at a time. Now in this way, he does not commit the biblical transgression of carrying an object 4 amot in a public domain, and although this method of carrying is forbidden by rabbinic law, the rabbis lifted this prohibition for the sake of protecting tefillin. And that is then, Rabotai, of today's Mishna Yomi. Everybody should have a Purim Sameach. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.